Hello. Our subject is holistic healing. And last time we were working through the 7 etheric centers. Remember that the ether is posited as a medium through which energy is transmitted. So we are looking at the energies underlying the physical body. There is a connection, however, between the energies underlying the physical body and the 7 main centers through which they are channeled with the physical body itself. And with the physical body, we are dealing, of course, with cells, with nerves, with endocrine glands that secrete key hormones that regulate the organism's function. We attempted a correlation between the centers and the glands, and we also explained how psychosomatic compensation can take place. Because if we look at the microcosm, macrocosm polarity, as we have had occasion to do so elsewhere, the cell is your smaller life, your microcosm, and the human being is the larger life. So there is a parallel between what's happening at the cellular level and what's happening at the human level. And when I say the human level, I'm talking about all that makes us up as human. And that includes our interior life, that includes our psyche, consciousness. Sometimes, if consciousness is out of balance in one respect, the physical body can compensate in areas and in ways that correspond to the particular function of consciousness that's out of balance. We mentioned the compensatory mechanism in relation to the heart center and the body's immunity. That was one example that we gave, a key example, because both the heart center, etheric center, the opening of which brings a consciousness of what love is, what non-polarized love energy is, and then on the other hand, the physical system, the immune system, which has to identify self from not self at a cellular level. What is a foreign body? And therefore, if a foreign body has been identified, to mount an immune response to it with an antigen attack. At a human level, we too need to be able to identify self and other, what's self and what's not self. And to be non-polarized means to have a friendly and cooperative disposition to what lies beyond ourselves. Otherwise, we are in effect imprisoned in our egos. But at the same time, not losing sense of dual identity, what belongs to me, what belongs to the other. So that in helping others, I don't merely drown in their own psychic process and be dragged down by them, and both of us go to hell, as it were, that I can help to lift up and establish a boundary which can help the other person understand also what belongs to them and not to you. a classic case of confusing what belongs to oneself and what belongs to another is psychological projection. Human beings are notorious for dealing with feelings of guilt by projecting guilt and blame onto other people. There are two ways to deal with guilt. One is to own it. It's my guilt. And then to do something about it. To confess, to forgive, to reconcile. To treat it at the source, in other words.
Yeah, the problem is unprocessed guilt. If you process it, it's fine, you let it go.
That's right. There's no guilt we can't recover from.
That's right.
There's no guilt that we can't correct and replace with something good and wholesome.
That's right.
But if we take another road because we don't want to deal with the guilt, because we don't want to even consider that it is I who have made this mistake and it is my guilt, it belongs to self, then what we do is say, I'm going to distance myself from that ugly manifestation of energy. And so I'll locate that over there where the other is. And so if anybody approaches me and reminds me of the guilt that is inside me, I'll locate it there, blame them, and attack them. It's like a haywire immune response. It's like an immune response that's gone cockamamie. Now, what I'm suggesting, hypothesizing, it's for you to think about, research more about, is that if you're getting it wrong at that level, let's say of guilt and projection, the cellular system that is responsible for identifying what's you and what's not you and attacking what's not you can compensate by manifesting aberrations. And people underestimate the widespread ramifications of immune disorders. I mean, it's the immune system that's responsible for cleaning up cancer cells, for example. Cancer cells spontaneously pop up in the human body. Everybody's got cancer cells in them. But in the normal course of events, the immune system cleans them up. AIDS was a disease of the immune system and of lymphocytes. Rheumatoid arthritis and other autoimmune disease like lupus, erythematosus. When you've got an autoimmune disease, your cells start attacking yourself. Healthy tissue. They start eating away. Like they're confused. Your immune system is confused and it's identifying self as not self and attacking self. And I'm suggesting, what if this were a compensation to a misjudgment of what belongs to me, what belongs to others at a psychic level? If psyche and soma are indeed unified, as the term psychosomatic suggests, then maybe we should expect some sort of compensatory aberration in the physical body. Does that make sense, Belinda?
Yeah, it does. It does make a lot of sense. I have a lot of immune issues because I'm very emotional. And I can understand it. Yeah, I can.
And of course, your allopathic medicine will treat it at a cellular level. It might give, for example, drugs that are anti-inflammatory, like cortisone, to damp down the effects of inflammation that have come about because the body is attacking itself. And inflammation has been speculated to underlie a lot of chronic conditions in the body, with good reason. Cardiovascular system disorders and other disorders can be underlaid by a low level rumbling, or maybe more than a low level of inflammation throughout the system. And what is inflammation? It's a battle, isn't it? And sometimes that inflammation is good and healing. Like we have a wound and cells rush into that area first to staunch the flow of blood. That's why you get platelets to coagulate the blood, and then you get cells that are going in and eating up the rubbish, and then other cells to come and repair, and so on. So there is a response in inflammation, which is towards restoring health. But if inflammation is going on in the body like a series of grass fires that have been started all over a landscape, then this is going to lead to chronic disease conditions. I want to segue into talking about psychodynamics, underlying control dramas. Back, I don't know when it was, in the 90s or in earlier days of the New Age movement, there was an author that published a book. I think his name was James Redfield. He published a book called The Celestine Prophecies, or The Celestine Prophecy. Now, I'm not endorsing all the ideas in that book, nor the system of James Redfield, but there was one particular insight adverted to in the Celestine Prophecy, which got a lot of traction, and it has a fair bit to commend itself, and that was the insight about energy plunder and the dramas that ensue from trying to get energy inappropriately from other human beings. So I'll use that as a launch pad to express my own views about that rather than what's in that book. You can go and look at the Celestine Prophecy if you want to, but Redfield had made the identification that in a sort of, in an unregenerate state where people hadn't done the spiritual work on themselves so that they were progressing along a path of mastery of the spiritual energy, typically they would resort to tactics of snatching, stealing energy from other people when they were low on energy, because we get low on energy on all levels, physical, emotional, mental, spiritual. When we're dispirited, when we're out and out fatigued or emotionally exhausted, then we need a shot of energy, don't we? Because it's energy that makes us feel alive
and youthful
and purposeful too. It's hard to muster up a purpose without sufficient energy.
That's right.
So
everybody wants it.
Everybody wants it, everybody needs it, we all need energy.
Oh, they're aggressive about it.
We run on energy, the sun runs on energy, our food chain runs on energy. You know, the plants capture the energy through photosynthesis and other organisms eat them. We eat the plants or the other organisms or whatever, so that it's all trapped sunlight, all energy, changing form, transmuting from one form to another. And that's life. That's manifest life lived out, all to do with energy flows. Now, he made the point that the majority of human beings, when they're low on energy, because they don't know how to access the source of energy, which is spiritual, which is sort of inexhaustible, which is transpersonal, they plunder energy from other people, and there are strategies that are used to do that. Stories, dramas have been set about finding this source of inexhaustible energy. Is it the sun? Is it nuclear energy? What is it? Well, we're talking now about spiritual development and evolution. So we're talking essentially about something that the human spirit can access. When we access it, it can inspire us, it can heal us, it can give us purpose and direction. It's what makes life worth living. Mazel tov, as they say. Good energy to you. So when we don't know about that or don't know how to access it, we turn to four main strategies. Now, I think Redfield popularised certain catchphrases. Like one of them was like the poor me strategy. And one of them he called the intimidator, and one of them he called the interrogator. And then there was a fourth one that was to do with, well, he probably gave it a name in his book, but I'll call it absenting yourself. That's another strategy for stealing energy. Mm-hmm. So instead of going to the vertical, we go to the horizontal. Right? It's a bit like we're always looking for people to fill that hole, that void in our soul. I mean, if we can only find the perfect person, they'd make me happy. Or the perfect holiday, the perfect car, the perfect job. And nothing ever fills us.
Or the perfect person that I can drain completely.
Or the perfect person in the perfect job who can offer the perfect holidays or the perfect lifestyle.
And I can drain them.
And we're always, yeah, well, that's essentially that follows. It's a corollary because we want it from them. We want that energy from them, and they can supply it. But the hole doesn't get filled.
No.
How many celebrities like Jim Carrey and others have said, look, I wish everybody in the world could have like all their desires met and be as rich as they want for a period of time. So they realise that is not going to make them happy.
That's right.
Now, that doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with material resources. All it means is that yearning for being fulfilled by outside things, it's a bottomless pit. It can't be filled. And the only thing that can fill that void is something spiritual and transcendental. And our mission here is to find that and to direct it into the world. In other words, there's a void inside each one of us, a psycho-spiritual void that can only be filled by the transcendent. If you try to fill it in any other way, you will fail. And that failure will be manifest in disappointment, depression, unhappiness.
Leads to more of a lack of energy.
Yes.
Catch-22.
And ultimately exhaustion. Exhaustion is, I've done this over and over again, and I still haven't got what I'm looking for. What's the lyric from the popular song? And we still haven't found what we're looking for. I still haven't found what I'm looking for. And Mick Jagger's, I can't get no satisfaction.
It's all about that.
Right? And I want and I desire, but I just can't get no satisfaction. That's what we're talking about here. Now, the reason there are 4 main strategies is because there are 4 elements which we've alluded to before. And so each of the strategies has to do with an aberration in one of the elements. And so I suppose a person can flip from one strategy to another, but over time one gets used to a particular dominant strategy. When I'm low on energy, do I typically get aggressive and angry and intimidate people? Because that intimidation is a way of grabbing energy from them, especially if they start quaking in their boots. We know from anecdotes and testimony that rapists get off on their victim's fear. They're actually feeding on it. And abusers get off on the fear of their victim and the helplessness of the victim, and with their intimidation, they're able, like a vampire, to draw that energy out.
That's it, they're vampires.
Now,
true vampires.
Well, let's say a word about that, because I'm not trying to alarm people, because I do hear people saying, oh, they're a vampire, they're a psychic vampire, I don't want to have anything to do with them. You can't go through life just fearing that people are going to take your energy. No, the end goal is to be able to correct these control dramas so that there's enough energy for everybody. So when people know how to establish their boundaries, and when they know
boundaries, that's it. You need to establish a boundary, otherwise you'll be bled.
Well, the boundary part is like saying you can't take energy this way, it's not on. The other part is helping the other to connect to the source. So when they know that they can get energy from the source, they don't need to plunder it.
Yeah. Changes them.
There's nothing to fear. There's nowhere to run to. Everybody has to do their bit in helping with the energy crisis. The energy crisis is far more than whether we stick to fossil fuels or we convert to renewables. This is happening on the outer, but what I'm talking about here and what James Redfield was alluding to is happening on the inner. So, when we're low on energy, do we go into intimidator? Or maybe we play the victim. That's his poor me type. And when we're victims, we whinge about how badly treated we are, and we suck sympathetic energy from other people. Then it becomes a strategy. Because as long as you're bewailing your lot and you think that something particularly bad has happened to you, right, more so than the average person. Yeah, other people have setbacks and disappointments, but what's happened to you is particularly woeful, and you're a particular victim, and then you keep drawing that sympathy, keep milking that sympathy, and that's a way of falsely replenishing your reserve of energy. Or maybe when you're low on energy, you bamboozle with words like a big tornado and storm. Maybe you go into over-intellectualizing, and sometimes it can just be like firing questions at other people. as a way of grabbing that energy. And I mean, I think we've all been in situations where instead of having a conversation, a person will opt to either preach at you or tell you their whole life story, buttonhole you, and explain something that seems completely inappropriate. Maybe they should have written it down, you know, maybe they should have published a paper or an article or something, and just had a a two-way reciprocal conversation. Well, that escape into what Redfield called the interrogator, and what I call like over-intellectualizing, inappropriate intellectualizing, can be an energy plunder strategy. Why did he call it the interrogator? Well, I suppose, imagine you're sitting in the witness stand in a courtroom, and then there's a lawyer cross-examining you and peppering you with questions, and there's nowhere to move, and you can almost be breathless through this cross-examination. And it's like you can't give your answers fast enough, and they've framed you, they've made a case against you. Now, there may be other times and other people whose main strategy is when they are frustrated in their expectations of a relationship, and it doesn't seem to be two-way enough for them, or it doesn't seem to be supplying their needs, supplying their energy. They can go AWOL. They can absent themselves and play a game of spiritual hide and seek with the person that they have a problem with. Is this what ghosting is? You know, they talk about ghosting. Somebody just disappears out of a relationship.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, well, sometimes people just unilaterally pull out of a relationship and just allow the other person's expectations to collapse, and then they don't know what's wrong, and then they have to go chase them and find them. And the more they chase and look, and this other person remains aloof. That's right, Redfield called it aloof.
Yeah.
In other words, they've ceased to engage properly, having given the indication that they wanted to be in relationship, they wanted engagement, then they unilaterally drop that and become aloof. They cease to engage, and they expect you to run after them. And as you run after them, you're sending them energy. That's their way of getting their energy.
Oh,
Where am I hiding? In the closet, under the bed. Come and find me.
Oh dear.
Now, I want to put in some undergirding to this. I want to add some theory about the four elements, which can explain why there are these energy plunder strategies. Now, we have four elements: fire, water, air, and earth. And they are involved in cognition. And very briefly, they are: fire is desire, water is feeling, air is intellect or intellectuality, and earth is physicality, the physical. Now, in the next transmission, I'm going to explain their proper function and what happens when they get out of balance, and how one element can temper another. It can be used as a corrective for a surfeit or excess of one element, and how they relate to the control dramas.